Kyle, we do not have to wear khakis for the next week because Jim Harbaugh didn't get it done. Lost in the college football playoff semifinals. As much as it stings me to see Jim lose in a big game, it is not an unfamiliar sight for me. Come on, man. TCU, you were a 6.5 point favorite. Not a dramatic favorite, but still, it's disappointing. I mean, we could look at the game itself and point to a couple things that happened. You have the touchdown that should have been. You had the 2 pick-sixes. How much do I fault Jim Harbaugh for that? There was also some dumb stuff defensively, too, that I would say that, okay, I would have liked to see Michigan make a better adjustment, but the needle of focus moves to Jim Harbaugh's future. Is it at Michigan? Or is it in the pros? We saw a report come out this week that suggests Jim's interested in whoever's offering a job in the NFL this offseason. It does seem like he may have maxed out at Michigan. What say you, Kyle Ledbetter?
Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the coaching decision that you happen to skip over, which was calling the Philly special on 4th and goal at the 2-yard line. Jim, what happened to establish the run? What was the whole point of establishing the run?
I'll say, for any time a coach uses a trick play, you're a genius if it hits. You're an idiot if it doesn't. I try not to come down on coaches too hard when they try and make those decisions, because if we're going to blow Doug Peterson whenever he hits on it successfully, then I just don't get the same sense of joy from, coming down on Jim for it not working.
Oh,
it seemed like a player execution issue.
Usually I'm in the same camp. This one is just like, but you're established the run guy, and then you get the ball at the 2-yard line and you call a pass play to your quarterback? Jim, what happened to establish the run, bud? What happened to all that?
What happened to the refs calling touchdowns that obviously were touchdowns? Whatever happened to replay, not overturning thing unless the evidence is indisputable?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Then he did establish the run and they fumbled at the 1-yard line. So I guess Michigan was just doomed to lose in the semifinal either way. But yeah, to your point about Harbaugh going to the pros, Bruce Feldman, along with a couple other people over at The Athletic, reported that Jim Harbaugh would take any job that was offered to him, which I saw that report and I was like, duh. He's been trying to posture for an NFL job for 4 years now. It's kind of been a running joke that Jim Harbaugh has been wanting to go to the NFL ever since that game against where Ezekiel Elliott picked up the first down in second overtime to beat Michigan, that he's been trying to jump ship for an NFL job. And the NFL has not come calling for Jim. Now, in 2020, it made sense. I mean, there was talks about whether Michigan wanted to keep him or not. And it turned out they came to that agreed contract where he took a pay cut because Jim wasn't good enough to get another job, and Michigan, he wasn't bad enough to fire him. So they kind of just came to terms on an adjusted contract, and he wanted the Lions job. The Lions literally said, we'd rather have Matt Campbell than Jim Harbaugh as our head coach. Matt Campbell ultimately turned down the Lions, the Iowa State coach. And last year he got that 7-hour interview with the Vikings coming out of the college football playoff appearance. So now that they've been 2 years in a row, they've beat Ohio State 2 years in a row. They're legitimately one of the 5 best programs in college football. Jim Harbaugh is hoping that this is the year that he finally gets offered an NFL job, whether that's the Colts, the Broncos, the Panthers. He's hoping that he gets one offer. And if Feldman's reporting is correct, then he'll take whichever job is offered to him if one is finally offered.
I'll say this, though. I think you're an idiot if you're not offering him a job. If you have an open head coaching position and you're not offering Jim Harbaugh a job, you're doing your organization a disservice, because this man has literally won at every place that he's gone. He won at Stanford. He turned around a Niners team that, I know that revisionist history, a lot of people like to look at that Niners team and say, oh man, they were so loaded. That's not what the talk in the building was when Mike Singletary was calling plays. Jim Harbaugh turned around the Niners. Jim Harbaugh turned around this Michigan program that, we go back to the Rich Rodriguez years, was at its lowest. People remembered Michigan, at least if you're from my generation, you remember Michigan for the Appalachian State game. That's all you remember Michigan for. And Jim went there, and now you're looking at Michigan again, and you're like, damn, that's a program I like. I just like seeing their colors on TV. I like seeing Michigan play football games. It's going to lose a little bit of luster if Jim moves on. But again, if you are, as you mentioned, the Cardinals, the Panthers, the Broncos, any of these teams that has an open head coaching position, you should be offering Jim Harbaugh a job, because he's shown that he's able to get it done. He's been a less with more type of coach throughout his different stops. However, the Bruce Feldman report of any job offered kind of concerns me because I am looking at these jobs and I don't know which one I would prefer for Jim, because as a fan of Jim, I want him to go to a situation that I actually think is conducive to excellence, conducive to winning, conducive to someone I think of a high esteem. And I look at the Broncos right now. I look at Russ having an all-time low for his career. He finally passed the bathroom tracker, 13 touchdowns versus 12 bathrooms in his home this past week. The Panthers, their quarterback right now is Sam Darnold, a guy who we know is an NFL bust, but 300 yards rushing against the Lions the past week gave the Panthers an opportunity to compete for the NFC South Championship this past weekend. The Cardinals, Kyler Murray. What's going to happen there? Major knee injury, came late in the year, probably won't be ready for seemingly the first couple months of the NFL season, if I was to predict it based off previous injuries. I don't know if I like any of these jobs for him.
Yeah.
But it's just how much belief do I have in Jim? Because, again, the Niners weren't good when he got there. Alex Smith wasn't looked highly upon when he got there. Suddenly, Alex Smith and the Niners are a 13-3 team in an NFC Championship game. Could he do that with any of these teams available? I don't know.
Well, these jobs wouldn't be open if they were like miraculously ideal, and these teams wouldn't be pursuing Jim Harbaugh, because the league has decided, and I'm going to assume that the league is not getting this wrong. The league has decided that Jim Harbaugh is not like a premium coach that they have to have. Now, the reasoning for that, not exactly sure what it is. I mean, it seems like most teams and fans are more excited to pursue DeMeco Ryans than they are to pursue Jim Harbaugh.
The league also determined for at least a year that Doug Peterson, a guy who actually won a Super Bowl, wasn't worthy of a job. So, sometimes the league makes bad decisions.
It's fair. It's been 4 years on Harbaugh. And again, I don't even know if he's going to get offered any of these jobs at the end of the day. So I don't know why Harbaugh hasn't gotten back in the league. His merits in San Francisco would be a resume worthy of such to get back into the league. Although I'm sure there's reasons for why that's the case. I mean, his time at Michigan, you said he turned around Michigan, but it took him a long time to turn around Michigan. It wasn't looking too hot there for a minute that he was going to be able to turn around Michigan.
Have been higher than that program has had in a very, very long time. Obviously, things have changed with the college football playoff system, but when you consider only 4 teams making it, to make it to the college football playoff in the 4-team era is remarkable. And I credit him for that. To beat Ohio State when they're getting 5-star guy after 5-star guy, and to absolutely embarrass them 2 years in a row. I give him credit for what he's been able to do the last couple of years. It took a little bit of a philosophy change, but the fact that he has been a flexible coach, you see, even just making it to a Super Bowl too, making it to 3 straight NFC Championship games. And we look at a guy like Andy Reid, who was able to do something similar with Philly, do something similar with KC. That's so hard to do in the NFL. There's so little needle mover head coaches. And I think he is. I really do, because at least for a short time, it seems like people respond to him. Now, the thing that you mentioned, why is it that Jim Harbaugh hasn't got an NFL job? Maybe word spreads fast, because you look at his relationship with Trent Baalke, that seemed to have a lot of the reasons why things blew up in San Francisco, that him and the GM just didn't like each other. Just at a base level, just didn't like each other. That kind of bled over into the ownership. It seemed like him and Jed York had a little bit of friction. Owners talk, GMs talk. We know how these kind of things happen. Sometimes you just kind of get left on the outside looking in if you're not part of the club. Maybe Jim kind of burned some bridges, because let's face it, he is kind of a weird, fiery personality. Jim's going to rub you the wrong way at times. And I think the great thing about college, why he's been a successful college coach, is you rotate through guys pretty quickly. Before guys can really get tired of you, they're gone. They're not all Stetson Bennett's in your system for 10 years.
Yeah, but I just don't think of I don't think of Jim Harbaugh being Mike Martz, which, like, for people who don't know, Mike Martz was the guy who went to the Super Bowl with the Legion of not the Legion of Boom, the Greatest Show on Turf, and then got fired by the Rams when the Rams started like falling off a cliff, and then never got to be an NFL head coach again. He was a coordinator on like the shitty Lions and the shitty 49ers, and like never made it back.
Dick Vermeil probably gets credited a lot with, the initial system put in place that led to the greatest show on turf. And Mike Martz was more of an inheritor. It's going back to actually a
Well,
phrase that Harbaugh used, being born on third base and thinking he hit a triple. I think that's kind of like Mike Martz versus Jim Harbaugh.
yeah, but remember what you were talking about. People argue that the talent was there when Harbaugh got in the door. There's that whole conversation. So like I don't know why Jim Harbaugh isn't getting a second chance. Someone who goes to 3 NFC Championship games and makes a Super Bowl gets a second chance in the NFL, given that they're giving like random dudes a second chance in the league. So
okay, you mentioned some specific situations, right? Like you mentioned Minnesota, right? Maybe it just made sense for them to go the young coach route. They wanted Kevin O'Connell.
They interviewed Harbaugh, and then they decided to not offer him the job, but they at least gave him an interview.
Did Jim take a step back? Did Jim look at his current situation in Michigan and is like, you know what? Maybe I'll run it back this year and actually win the national title, which was a real possibility this year. You look at this year's Michigan team versus last year's Michigan team. We thought that this year's team was more likely and capable to get it done than last year's version of Michigan. And fortunately, it didn't happen for him. But still, maybe that kind of led into him not getting the Minnesota job. You talk about Detroit wanting to go Matt Campbell over him. That's a mistake. I don't know if going Dan Campbell over Jim Harbaugh was a mistake. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's about the same, but at least if Jim was able to do something with the pieces on that team similar to what he was able to do with San Francisco, then it was an obvious mistake. We'll see whatever happens in Detroit. Dan Campbell, still a lot of stuff to figure out there.
But
other situations. I know the Raiders at one point were interested. I don't know how interested Jim was in them. Was it mutual? They decided to go with John Gruden because Mark Davis loved John Gruden, thought he was the best coach he ever met in his life. And then John Gruden gets fired and McDaniels is there and everyone's telling you, oh, if you go with McDaniels, this is the guy, this is the next guy coming up, and maybe you skip on Jim over that. There's a case by case, individual situations, a lot of factors that may have contributed to why Jim doesn't have a job. Just hell, it's kind of like dating, right? Sometimes you meet the perfect girl, but it's at the wrong time. Could have been a lot of case of timing situations with Jim.
I think to the point about like the specific situations, like Detroit didn't even bring him in for an interview. The Raiders knew they were hiring Gruden once he was willing to sign with them. The Vikings job probably. And I don't think that teams shouldn't offer Jim Harbaugh. The thing I said last year when we were talking about the Raiders job being open again and whether the Raiders should go after Jim Harbaugh is, do you think he's the best, most qualified person for the job? And ultimately, I think that these, shall we call them piss poor organizations like the Panthers, the Cardinals, the Broncos, the Colts, who are looking for these job openings, should sit down and like interview a plethora of candidates? Or have they decided in their mind that we want to go after Jim Harbaugh because he's the name? I don't know exactly what the reasoning is. And again, for the past 8 years, people have decided that they just don't want to hire Jim Harbaugh as an NFL head coach. So I assume he's not going to have like multiple offers lined up on the doorstep this year, given that we've seen him get one interview in the last 4 years. So I think if one of them gets offered, it just means that he's ready to go back to the NFL.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let's say he gets offered all three: Arizona, Carolina, Denver. Where should he go?
Well, if you're giving me those options, I'm going to take the quarterback in Arizona, knowing that, because first of all, let's acknowledge all three of these organizations kind of poorly run. I mean, the Broncos have a new owner, so at least that might give them the opportunity. But as we saw with our buddy Teppers over there in Carolina, a new owner doesn't necessarily mean all your problems are going to be solved. Sometimes it just goes from one level of dysfunction and gross and creepy owner to another level of dysfunction in what Teppers is doing with the Panthers. So new owner doesn't necessarily guarantee success and changes, but if you're giving me those three options and all of them are kind of like poorly run organizations, I'm taking the Cardinals just because I know I have a quarterback. I know he's out for the season next year for the most part, but at least I know I have a quarterback who is the face of the franchise at that point. So if you're giving me those three options, I'd take the Cardinals. Honestly, if the Colts job was offered, I might consider that one, knowing that they don't have a great option available.
Forgot about the Colts. I mean, I guess you would say with the Colts, they have a little bit of flexibility to draft a guy. They do have a draft pick that's good enough to get someone the early round. So if you want to bring in Harbaugh and say, hey, go after Will Levis, and that's your case. I mean, I know Jim obviously has some ties to the organization, so that kind of would help, and the fan base could embrace that. Because the Jeff Saturday thing, it was just a placeholder. I think we've all kind of accepted that.
Mm-hmm.
The Colts, that's sneaky good. Now, the question for there is, do the Colts retain Ballard? How much blame does Ballard get? Does Jim get his own guy? That's another thing that kind of has to get factored into this. Is Jim just an extension of whoever the current GM is?
I don't think Jim's going to be a personnel coach. I think he's going to get hired and not have the power of personnel
what
decisions.
Would be nice about the Arizona situation, as you mentioned, is seemingly Cliff and Keim are gone. So
Keim is definitely gone. We'll see about Cliff.
So there's a possibility that the GM spot is open too. So you might have the opportunity to bring your guys in, marry someone to Harbaugh, and see if it can become a happy marriage out there in the desert. So that is kind of a pro there. To the Saints, I don't know what's going to happen with Dennis Allen, if they're going to move on as well. I don't know if New Orleans is at all appealing. I know they have a great defense, and you look back to, again, what the Niners were able to do in their turnaround. They had a good defense already, right? Jim comes in, you know what he wants to do. He wants to smash mouth run style with a good defense. Alvin Kamara's there. Maybe you run it back with Andy Dalton for a season if you can't find a better quarterback. Derek Carr may be available. Maybe Jim Harbaugh wants to sign himself up for the Derek Carr, the Saints defense. There's some more options that we even give credit for. I'll leave it to the viewers now. Actually, viewers, where should Jim Harbaugh sign if a team is offering him a contract? Hard to say who that team is, but which teams want him? Which team should Jim want? That's the question I have for you guys. Leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. Follow us on our social medias. Follow the Neon Lights at Slumpbuster Podcast, at Slumpbuster Pod. Juju, Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you on the next one.